What's up, guys? This is Sin. So I feel like every single time we have a tier 0 deck, everybody keeps saying, oh, I think this is the best tier 0 deck this game has ever seen. I think it's kind of capped, the kind of thing that is inevitable because of power creep, so it's understandable if the next best deck is better than the previous one. But anyways, today I wanted to make a video where I compare all the best decks that we have seen in the history of the game and try to figure out which one is the true king. Before we go any further, first of all, smash the like and subscribe button. Also, this is kind of going to be like my personal take. A lot of this might be a little biased or incorrect, so if I offend anyone in this video, all I have to say is I'm not gonna finish my sentence. But yeah, with that being said, let's get right into it. Okay, so first things first is Paye, which is obviously in the best section. The reason for that is because I think this deck only existed for 2 YCSs. It got emergency ban at the speed of light, I think like 3 weeks after the set. Breakers of Shadows, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that set was so freaking unfair. But yeah, this deck I think had YCS Sydney and YCS Atlanta 2015, correct me if I'm wrong, and in both YCSs, this deck was ridiculous. It was way too good. It completely dominated. I think it might have had like 29 out of 32 slots in the top cut. I do remember that there were a couple of Domain Monarchs and maybe like 1 or 2 Cosmos, but in the OCG, Burning Abyss was the second best deck because it was main decking Anti-Spell, and they also had Beatrice back then. Gladiator Beast, this deck was overpowered during 2008 and even very good during 2009. So yeah, it's really hard to not consider this a tier 0 deck just because the deck was so ahead of its time and it was just so powerful overall. So it's a classic. I'm gonna have to put respect on the deck. Okay, Snake Eyes is not in the best section. Definitely not, because it had to always exist with other decks that were also very annoying. And even though this deck was the best deck to play, objectively speaking, it was especially the best engine to play, because the pure Snake Eyes deck, I mean, you also had like Fire King Snake Eye, which was also very good. And then you had like so many other variants, and now there's other decks like Yubel, which also kind of share the tier 0 spot with Snake Eye. So it's not really like you can say that this is the only thing that exists in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, I can't really put it here. It would be just disingenuous. And also when you see top cut, it's not like 90% Snake Eye. It's maybe like 50% or 60%, which is still a lot, but it's not on the same level as Paye, for example. Gookie is just too many bricks. It was just not enjoyable to play with. And also it was 100% pure dice roll, except if you were going second against like maybe Trickstar, Sky Striker, sometimes you could naturally win going second. But even then, sometimes your hand randomly lost to like one Widow Anchor just because you sucked. Maybe you're too busy drawing the equip spells. You know, try to draw your extenders instead, your Twin Twister, etc. Okay, Dragon Ruler is also kind of indecent, but where there is Dragon Ruler, there's also Spellbook, because they're pretty much the same thing. I mean, not really, but they, again, existed at the same time. So the Dragon Ruler Spellbook rivalry is pretty much very similar to what we have currently with Snake Eye Fiendsmith and Yubel Fiendsmith. I want to say it's very comparable, even though, again, when you see top cut numbers, Snake Eye is just way above Yubel, but then when you see people who get really deep in top cut, Yubel has a tendency to do very well as well. We had Marshall with Yubel. Sacramento, we had Carlos with top 4 with the Yubel FTK. I know practically nothing about Spellbook, although I do know what the cards do, and I do know that they could summon Zhaogin, they could summon, and they had Spellbook of Judgment to search like freaking 7 cards on end phase, but then Dragon Ruler had something very similar in the form of Super Rejuvenation, and they could use multiple in a turn, which would mean that sometimes they would draw like 15 cards, and they would have so much money that they would have to discard cards, and they were fueling their graveyard with a bunch of Dragon Rulers, and next turn it would be pretty much a guarantee OTK. So that's how the deck functioned. It wasn't like you make unbreakable boards going first. No. But yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't play back in the days. Necros is a good one, huh? Where do I put this one? The thing is, Necros had so many counters. I mean, if we're talking about the Jin version, then yeah, maybe here. The issue with Necros is that we had so many decks that, when you really think about it, could counter Necros with proper gameplay, to the point where Necros, even though it was tier 0, for sure, absolutely, obviously, otherwise it wouldn't be in this video, like decks like Burning Abyss, for example, piloted by someone with an IQ of 10 billion like Jesse Cotton, could absolutely win against Necros. The thing is, the dice roll was never important, because Necros was almost a going second deck more than a going first deck. Going first, the deck never really did anything. I mean, you were drawing cards, you were fueling your graveyard, you were getting resources in rotation, but you weren't making unbreakable boards. As a matter of fact, most of these decks weren't making unbreakable boards. Well, Snake Eyes and Paye and Gookie were. Unicore against Burning Abyss was fine, but they had so many outs to everything. Burning Abyss was just so good overall at playing around Trishula, because you could control the amount of cards in your hand so that you wouldn't get Trishula, because you can chain Karma Cut or Phoenix Wind Blast or Regeki Break. Discard a card, which was the final card in your hand, because you're good at the game, you're drawing 5 traps with a monster, which is always Graph or Skarm, and then you just get to survive. Yeah, I think a good Burning Abyss player was just, it had a good matchup against Necros, and also Ritual Beast had a fantastic Necros matchup from what I have heard. Okay, Zodiac, for talking about the Fusion Substitute version, this has to be in the best section, unfortunately. You would have to play hand traps in order to counter it, because they were drawing way too many cards, and then they were drawing the D barrier. But before that, they weren't really making too much, because you could just play cards like Darkhold or Regeki. So I do remember that in the Fusion Substitute version, I saw someone top a YCS or even a Euro WCQ with a non-Fusion Substitute version of the deck, which meant that you wouldn't lose to cards like Retelling Sea, which were extremely good against the Fusion Sub version, because then all of your cards get banished, the Fusion Sub gets banished, so you can't even like loop it, etc. But what really pissed me off is the fact that it actually started as a pretty cool deck overall. I mean, when it was tier 1, and when it existed with all those 60 card decks, like 60 card Infernoid Zodiac with 3 Rapier, that was one of my favorite formats of all time. It's actually in my top 3 formats. I loved it so much, but unfortunately, Zodiac Rapier went to 2. And because of that, the Infernoid deck, for example, just got way worse, because then the Rat wasn't one card with a Kagutsuchi. But then we got the Ram combo where you could destroy yourself. I mean, Ram was already a thing, but we had Chakanine in Maximum Crisis, the set that introduced the True Dracos, and also Ash. And Ash was unfortunately Infernoid's worst nightmare. I keep bringing up Infernoids because that was the deck that I played. Again, back to the pure Zodiac deck. This was undoubtedly like the best deck. But also, True Draco Zodiac was very good as well. But to be fair, the Fusion Substitute version was just way better than everything else, so it was still tier 0. Adamancipator, it existed with so many other decks. Nah, I'm just kidding. Adamancipator is unfair. The deck was so good at beating hand traps because of Kwakimeru Guardian. You just want to Ash me or Veiler me? How about no? It also had to exist with other decks like Full Power, Dragon Link, Infernoble. That format was catastrophic. We had Needle Fiber, Link Cross, and Auroradon coexisting at the same time. Like, bruv. All we're missing is Summon Sorceress and Firewall. Like, seriously. Kashtira. Yeah, that was by far, I think, the worst tier 0 deck we have ever had in the history of the game. It's really hard to argue otherwise, honestly. It's that one tier 0 deck where, even though the focus is all about this deck in the format, it was kind of the easiest one to counter because one card kind of just outed everything. Okay, Teledad is, again, another classic, another insane tier 0 deck, and hands down one of the best of all time. It's very debatable whether Teledad was better than Paye or Zodiac. Honestly, in the same league, no, I'm just kidding. Teledad was way better than all these decks, because this deck, I guess, Domain Monarch, like, the field spell was annoying for you, you needed your extra deck. Teledad, come on, like, what was there to stop the deck? This was like the first, no, actually, it wasn't the first pay to win format, but it was like the first, like, ultra major obvious pay to win format, because Dark Arm Dragon was like $300 or something stupid. So yeah, you can't afford the card? My bad. Okay, Chaos is the best deck this game has ever seen, just because it's the first tier 0 format of all time, and yeah, it was 2004 at Worlds. We only had Chaos. Yeah, that's it. But it's not really like a theme. It's just like you're playing good cards in your deck and that's it. Even like Teledad wasn't really that much of a theme. It's not really an archetype. It's just you play good dark monsters and then you play Dark Arm Dragon and that's it. Tier Elements. Oh, let me think about that one. Tier Elements is probably the best decent tier 0 deck. It's maybe worse than these ones just because this deck had to live with the existence of Shifter, which was played in a bunch of decks, such as Flunderies and Exorcister, but we also had the Sprite deck. Even though I think Sprite was way worse, there was a format where tier elements did exist, where I think Sprite was a little better, and that's because of Joshua Schmidt playing Runic Sprite and just showcasing just how good that deck is. During that format, Runic Sprite was better than tier, but then after that, we got the Shizu cards, which made the tier elements a little too good, and because of that, if you didn't have Shifter, or if you just kept winning your dice rolls with tier, there was honestly just no way you lost. Unless you were like in a mirror match, then, you know, the mirror match was kind of rough. And also, sometimes you didn't know what deck your opponent played, so you were milling Agido and Kelbeck, and you were not using their effects. And turns out they weren't even playing tier, so you kind of just missed out on free advantage. So yeah, it was like that tier 0 deck that wasn't even like that unfair. I don't know. Just because everybody was prepared for it. Tier overall a little like less good, but still. I mean, it would still be like in this section at the very least. Spiral, it just played a lot of bricks, but it's still like in the top 5, obviously. If we're talking about like the machine dupe version, holy shit. Yeah, with like 3 quick fix and everything, god damn, that deck was nasty. And also, bro, this deck had no competition. It coexisted with like Trickstar and garbage Pendulum Magician, so. And last but definitely not least, we had a Pendulum FTK / Adderall. I also don't know where to put this, my god, because this one was nasty, like absolutely nasty. Man, I really want to put more things in best tier 0, but then it's gonna have way too many decks and defeat the purpose of having like a tier list at this point. Because all those decks, I mean, to be fair, I think this should actually downgrade to mid, even though it was broken just because it had to like live with so many other unfair decks. And you know what? Dragon Ruler and Spellbook as well. I don't even care what people say. Even though they were broken, just because there were 2 decks that are like equally as good at the same time. And also Evil Swarm. That's a terrible argument, but I couldn't care less. Pendulum, was it better than tier? Was it worse? I guess Anti-Spell was a hard counter. This deck lost really hard to Ghost Ogre, which, I mean, there weren't even that many hand shops. Veiler wasn't that great. Imperm wasn't around. Nibiru wasn't around. Yeah, this deck was so hard to beat. But it's also the fact that it could consistently FTK with Engine without even playing like bricks. Really? You played Instant Fusion and the Donuts. That's it. So yeah, this deck was kind of filthy. Yeah, it's probably gonna have to stay here, even though the exact position is very interchangeable. Pretty much every deck here, maybe Gookie has to be the worst just because of the bricks. And by the way, I know it's pronounced Goki, but I really couldn't care less. Like, I actually don't give a shit. Yeah, Snake Eye, just because there's other decks that are also very good. A lot of anti-meta decks. Necros, same argument. A lot of anti-Necros decks. Pendulum, not a lot of anti-Pendulum decks. More like anti-Pendulum cards, like Anti-Spell. And then Tier, Shifter or Bust, or Windbearer Statue. Spiral, didn't really have too many counters, other than Ghost Reaper, and, I mean, Ghost Ogre, Veiler, Imperm, Ash, Ghost Bell. Pretty much every single card to hit double helix when you think about it. Zodiac, yeah, that card, yeah, no, that deck was not fun at all. Paye was just a little too good, and then Teledan and Chaos are just, they have to be there. So yeah, you guys let me know how you feel about this tier list. I think for the most part, I did like a relatively decent job. I'm not 100% sure, but maybe I'm wrong a little bit. 90% sure this is like somewhat correct. But yeah, you guys let me know how you feel in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.